Parents with a 6-month-old baby vanished into thin air during a catastrophic blizzard at their mountain camp, leaving their tent still zipped shut and baby bottles still warm on the camping stove. The discovery that surfaced 5 years later left everyone speechless. Their baby Stroller was found sitting perfectly upright on a narrow mountain ledge that no human could ever reach. This is the story that made veteran mountain rescue teams question everything they thought they knew about survival in the wilderness. September 15th, 2019. The morning air in Glacier National Park carried the crisp promise of early autumn. Sarah and Mike Chen had been planning this camping trip for months, their first real adventure as a family of 3 with their 6-month-old daughter Emma. Sarah, 28, worked as a pediatric nurse in Seattle. She'd grown up hiking these very trails with her father. Mike, 31, was a software engineer who'd fallen in love with the mountains the day he met Sarah. Baby Emma was their miracle. After 3 years of trying, she'd arrived healthy and perfect, with Sarah's dark eyes and Mike's infectious smile. "Are you sure she's old enough for this?" Mike asked, adjusting Emma's tiny hiking carrier for the 3rd time that morning. Sarah laughed, the sound echoing off the granite peaks surrounding them. "My dad had me camping when I was 2 months old." Emma's practically a veteran. They'd chosen Hidden Lake Trail for good reason. It was challenging enough to feel like an adventure, but accessible enough for a family with an infant. The campsite sat at 6,800 feet elevation, surrounded by towering peaks and crystal-clear alpine water. Their camp was picture perfect. A bright blue dome tent positioned on level ground, 20 feet from the lake's edge. Mike had insisted on bringing their premium camping stove, the kind that could handle high-altitude cooking. Sarah had packed enough baby supplies for a week, though they were only staying 3 nights. The first day passed like a dream. Emma napped peacefully in her carrier while they hiked the easier trails. They took dozens of photos, Sarah feeding Emma with the mountains reflected in the lake behind them, Mike making funny faces to get their daughter to smile, all 3 of them bundled together as the afternoon sun painted the peaks golden. That evening, they cooked dinner on their camp stove while Emma lay on a blanket, gurgling happily at the stars beginning to appear overhead. The weather report had mentioned possible light snow, but nothing concerning. September storms in Glacier were common and usually passed quickly. "This is perfect," Sarah whispered, cradling Emma while Mike banked their small campfire. "I want her to grow up loving the mountains like we do, but perfection has a way of turning into nightmare without warning." The wind picked up around midnight. What started as gentle gusts soon became something much more dangerous. Sarah woke first, feeling the tent walls pressing inward with each blast. "Mike," she whispered, reaching across to where Emma slept between them in her portable crib. "The wind's getting pretty strong." Mike checked his weather app. No signal. The nearest cell tower was 40 miles away, and the mountains blocked most satellite reception. But through their tent's mesh window, he could see clouds racing across the stars at unnatural speed. By 2 a.m., the first snowflakes began to fall. Not the gentle dusting they'd expected, but heavy, wet flakes that stuck to everything they touched. The temperature was dropping fast. Emma began to fuss. Sarah lifted her daughter, feeling how cold the baby's tiny hands had become despite the sleeping bag. "We need to get her warmer," she said, unzipping her own bag to share body heat. The storm intensified with frightening speed. Within an hour, snow was falling so heavily they couldn't see the lake just 20 feet away. The wind howled through the peaks above them, creating an otherworldly sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Mike got up to secure their gear. Their camp stove was still running on low, keeping baby bottles warm and a pot of water, something Sarah insisted on for nighttime feedings. Everything else was battened down and secure. "Maybe we should consider heading down," Sarah said. though even as she spoke, they both knew it was too late. The trail they'd hiked up was already invisible under 6 inches of fresh snow, and it would be suicide to attempt it in the dark with a baby. They were trapped. The last weather event like this in Glacier National Park had been in 1996. Local rangers later called it a 1,000-year storm, the kind of freak weather pattern that meteorologists said shouldn't have been possible in September. By 4 a.m., snow was falling at a rate of 3 inches per hour. The wind gusted to over 60 miles per hour, strong enough to flatten smaller trees. The temperature had dropped from 45 degrees to 18 degrees in just 6 hours. Inside their tent, the Chen family huddled together. Emma had finally fallen asleep against Sarah's chest. Mike kept the camp stove running, knowing they'd need the warmth to survive until morning. "We'll be okay," he whispered, though his voice shook slightly. "This has to blow over by dawn." Those were the last words anyone would ever hear from the Chen family. Park Ranger Janet Morrison had been working Glacier National Park for 15 years. She'd seen storms, accidents, and disappearances that would haunt most people forever. But she'd never seen anything like what greeted her at Hidden Lake on September 17th. The storm had finally passed at sunrise, leaving behind 3 feet of fresh snow and a landscape transformed beyond recognition. Janet's team had been monitoring the weather, but they hadn't expected anyone to be camping in the alpine areas during such severe conditions. When they reached the Chen family's campsite, everything looked wrong. The tent was still standing, perfectly intact. The zipper was closed from the inside. No snow had accumulated inside the tent itself, suggesting it had remained sealed throughout the storm. Their camp stove was still running, keeping a pot of water warm with baby bottles floating inside, but the family was gone. "That's impossible," muttered Tom Bradley, a 20-year veteran of mountain rescue. He'd seen hypothermia victims, avalanche survivors, people who'd wandered off in confusion, but he'd never seen a sealed tent with missing occupants. Inside the tent, everything was organized exactly as a family would leave it for the night. 3 sleeping bags laid out, baby Emma's portable crib positioned between her parents, diapers and baby supplies neatly arranged in one corner, Sarah's hiking boots placed carefully beside the tent door with Mike's right next to them. There were no signs of struggle, no torn fabric, no indication that anyone had left the tent in panic. The zipper was pulled completely shut from the inside, something that would be impossible to do while exiting the tent. Most puzzling of all, there were no footprints leading away from the campsite. The storm had ended only hours earlier, and the snow around their tent was completely undisturbed except for the rescue team's own tracks. How do 3 people disappear from inside a sealed tent? Janet asked, though she knew no one had an answer. The search began immediately. Despite the challenging conditions, teams of rescue workers, search dogs, and volunteers scoured every inch of the area around Hidden Lake. They followed every possible trail, checked every crevice and overhang where a family might have sought shelter. They found nothing. Search dogs, trained to detect human scent even under snow, showed no interest in any direction leading away from the campsite. It was as if the Chen family had simply vanished into thin air. The FBI's Missing Persons Unit took over the case after 72 hours. Special Agent Diana Reeves had handled disappearances in national parks before, but this one defied every pattern she'd ever seen. "People don't just disappear," she told the press conference on day 5 of the search. "We will find answers." But weeks turned into months, and the Chen family remained missing. The case file grew thick with witness statements, weather reports, and technical analyses, but none of it brought investigators any closer to understanding what had happened. As winter approached, the search was officially suspended. The case remained open, but with no new leads to follow, it gradually faded from public attention. Sarah's parents held a memorial service that December. Mike's brother gave a eulogy for 3 people who might still be alive somewhere. Baby Emma's nursery in Seattle remained exactly as her parents had left it, a monument to hope that was slowly dying. For 5 years, the Chen family mystery remained unsolved and seemingly unsolvable, until a rock climber named David Park changed everything. David Park had been climbing in Glacier National Park for over a decade. A software engineer from Portland, he knew these peaks as well as anyone who wasn't a park ranger. On August 22, 2024, he was attempting a technical route on the north face of Mount Reynolds, about 2 miles from Hidden Lake. The climb was challenging but routine for someone of David's skill level. He was about 800 feet up the granite wall when he spotted something that made him stop mid-climb and stare in disbelief. On a narrow ledge, approximately 50 feet to his right, sitting perfectly upright and intact, was a baby stroller. Not just any stroller. This was clearly a high-end model designed for outdoor use, with oversized wheels and a weather-resistant canopy. But what made David's blood run cold was its position. The ledge was barely 3 feet wide and completely inaccessible except by technical rock climbing. Even experienced climbers would struggle to reach it. And yet, there it sat, as if someone had simply placed it there and walked away. David immediately called out to his climbing partner, who was below him on the same route. "Jake, you need to see this." Jake Martinez, a mountain guide with 20 years of experience, pulled himself up to David's position and followed his pointing finger. The stroller was clearly visible, its bright red and black fabric standing out against the gray granite. "That's impossible," Jake said. "How would anyone get a stroller up there?" They both knew the answer. No one could. The ledge was accessible only by climbing equipment and advanced technical skills. Even then, hauling a bulky stroller up 800 feet of vertical rock would be nearly impossible for experts, let alone people carrying a baby. David managed to work his way across the rock face to get a closer look. What he found defied every logical explanation. The stroller was positioned perfectly upright, its wheels aligned as if it had been carefully placed rather than dropped or thrown. The safety straps were neatly buckled, the canopy was properly extended, and a small stuffed elephant, clearly a baby's toy, was secured in the seat pocket. Most impossibly, the stroller showed no significant weathering despite being exposed to 5 years of mountain weather. The fabric was faded but intact. The metal frame showed only surface rust, and the wheels still turned smoothly. David took dozens of photos before carefully working his way back to his original position. He and Jake completed their climb as quickly as possible, then hiked directly to the nearest ranger station. Park Ranger Morrison was skeptical until she saw the photos. She recognized the stroller immediately. She'd seen dozens of pictures of it during the original investigation into the Chen family disappearance. "This changes everything," she said, already reaching for her radio to call in specialist rescue teams. Recovering the stroller required a complex technical rescue operation. The National Park Service brought in their most experienced high-angle rescue specialists, along with FBI investigators and forensic experts. Getting a team to the ledge took 2 full days of preparation. They had to establish anchor points, string safety lines, and coordinate with helicopter support for evacuation. The operation cost over $50,000 and involved more than 20 personnel. When they finally reached the stroller, What they found raised more questions than it answered. The stroller was indeed the one belonging to the Chen family. The serial number matched their purchase records, and Sarah's parents confirmed it was the same model and color their daughter had bought for baby Emma. But its condition was inexplicable. Forensic analysis showed that while the stroller had definitely been exposed to weather for several years, the degradation was far less than expected. Materials that should have been destroyed by freeze-thaw cycles were still functional. UV damage was minimal despite years of high-altitude sun exposure. Most puzzling was the complete absence of any biological evidence. No hair, skin cells, saliva, or other traces of the Chen family. Even more strange, there was no DNA from baby Emma, despite the fact that infants constantly shed genetic material. It was as if the stroller had been thoroughly cleaned before being placed on the ledge. "Someone wanted us to find this," FBI Special Agent Reeves told the investigation team, "but they also wanted to make sure we wouldn't learn anything from it." The forensic team spent weeks examining every inch of the stroller. They found traces of high-altitude vegetation that matched the immediate area around the ledge, confirming it had been there for an extended period. But they also found microscopic metal filings that suggested the stroller had been in contact with climbing equipment, specifically the type of carabiners and pulleys used in technical rescue operations. This led to a disturbing theory. Someone with advanced climbing skills had deliberately placed the stroller on that ledge, possibly years after the Chen family's disappearance. But who? And why? The stroller discovery reopened the Chen family case with full FBI resources. Agent Reeves assembled a task force that included mountain rescue experts, forensic specialists, and behavioral analysts. Their first breakthrough came from analyzing climbing permit records. Over the past 5 years, only 14 people had registered for technical climbs in the specific area where the stroller was found. David Park and Jake Martinez were obviously excluded as suspects since they'd discovered it. That left 12 climbers who had both the skills and opportunity to place the stroller on the ledge. One name immediately stood out: Marcus Webb, a 34-year-old climbing guide from Montana. Webb had permits for 3 separate climbs in the area, once in 2020, again in 2022, and most recently in early 2024, just 4 months before the stroller was discovered. More significantly, Webb had been working as a climbing guide in Glacier National Park during September 2019, when the Chen family disappeared. He would have been in the area during the blizzard. Agent Reeves and her team located Webb at his home in Kalispell, Montana. What they found there changed the entire direction of the investigation. Webb's garage contained climbing equipment worth over $30,000, including specialized high-altitude rescue gear. But it also contained something much more disturbing: a detailed topographical map of the hidden lake area with the Chen family's campsite marked in red ink. When confronted with the evidence, Webb initially claimed he'd simply been tracking the missing persons case out of professional interest. Many climbing guides followed search and rescue operations, he insisted. But under pressure, his story began to fall apart. Webb eventually admitted he'd been in the hidden lake area on the night the Chen family disappeared. He'd been conducting an unofficial night climb, something technically illegal without proper permits. When the storm hit, he'd taken shelter in a small cave about a quarter mile from the Chen campsite. "I saw their tent," he finally confessed. "I thought about checking on them when the storm got really bad, but I didn't want to explain what I was doing up there illegally." This admission placed Webb at the scene during the crucial hours when the family vanished. but he vehemently denied any involvement in their disappearance. "I never saw them leave the tent," he insisted. "In the morning when the storm cleared, I climbed out and left. I didn't even know they were missing until I heard about it on the news days later." The investigators pressed harder. If Webb was innocent, why had he placed their stroller on an impossible-to-reach ledge years later? That's when Webb broke down completely and told them a story that no one was prepared to hear. Marcus Webb's confession took over 6 hours to complete. What he revealed challenged everything investigators thought they knew about the Chen family disappearance. According to Webb, he had indeed seen the family that night, but not at their campsite. Around 3 a.m., during the height of the storm, he witnessed something that he claimed haunted him for 5 years. "I was in my shelter when I heard voices," Webb told investigators. "Not normal talking. It sounded like arguing, maybe panic. I looked out and saw lights moving through the storm. Webb claimed he saw 2 figures carrying something between them, moving away from the direction of the Chen campsite toward a steep ravine about 300 yards north of Hidden Lake. I thought it might be rescue workers, but that didn't make sense. No one else should have been up there in that storm." Webb said he remained in his shelter, afraid to reveal his illegal presence in the park. By morning, the snow had covered any tracks, and he left the area without investigating further. For months afterward, Webb said he convinced himself he'd imagined the whole thing. When news of the missing family broke, he was terrified to come forward because of his illegal climbing activities. But the stroller changed everything. According to Webb, he found it in 2022 during a legitimate climb, wedged in rocks at the bottom of the same ravine where he'd seen the mysterious figures. It was damaged but recognizable from news photos of the missing family. "I should have called the authorities immediately," Webb admitted, "but I panicked. I'd waited 3 years to say anything, and I thought no one would believe me." Instead, Webb made a decision that would seem incomprehensible to most people. He decided to leave the stroller somewhere it would eventually be found, but in a way that wouldn't implicate him in the original disappearance. Over the course of 2 years, Webb planned and executed the complex operation to place the stroller on the mountain ledge. He used specialized climbing equipment to haul it up the rock face during his 2024 climb, then positioned it where other climbers would eventually spot it. "I thought if someone else found it, the case would be reopened and maybe the family would finally get justice," Webb explained. "I never meant to make things more mysterious." But Webb's confession raised a crucial question. Who were the figures he'd seen carrying something through the storm that night? Armed with Webb's testimony, investigators launched a massive search operation in the ravine north of Hidden Lake. Ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and excavation teams worked systematically through the area where Webb claimed to have found the stroller. On the 3rd day of searching, they made a discovery that validated Webb's story and deepened the mystery simultaneously. Buried under 5 years of accumulated debris and seasonal flooding, search teams found more evidence of the Chen family. Emma's diaper bag, waterlogged but intact, along with Mike's wallet and Sarah's hiking GPS device. The items were scattered across a 50-yard area at the bottom of the ravine, as if they'd been deposited by rushing water during spring snowmelt over multiple years. But there was still no sign of the family themselves. Forensic analysis of the recovered items provided new clues. The GPS device, once restored by specialists, contained waypoint data from the family's hike. It showed they had indeed followed the planned trail to Hidden Lake and set up camp exactly where their tent was found. But the device also contained one waypoint that didn't match their itinerary, a location marked at 11:47 p.m. on September 15th, approximately 200 yards from their campsite in the direction of the ravine. This suggested that at least one member of the family, presumably whoever was carrying the GPS, had left the campsite late that night and traveled toward the area where their belongings were eventually found. But why? And what happened to them after they reached that location? Agent Reeves developed a new theory based on the accumulating evidence. She believed the Chen family had left their tent voluntarily during the storm, possibly seeking better shelter or responding to some perceived threat. They had made it to the ravine area, where some kind of accident occurred. The scattered belongings suggested they might have fallen into the ravine during the storm, possibly while trying to cross it in poor visibility. Spring snowmelt and seasonal flooding over 5 years could have dispersed their remains downstream, explaining why no bodies had been found. But this theory still didn't explain Webb's claim of seeing two figures carrying something between them. If the family had been victims of an accident, who were the mysterious people he witnessed? The answer came from an unexpected source: facial recognition technology and social media analysis. FBI digital forensics specialists had been analyzing every piece of electronic evidence connected to the case, including social media posts from other campers in Glacier National Park during September 2019. They found something that had been overlooked during the original investigation. A hiking blogger named Jessica Liu had posted Instagram photos from her own camping trip in the park, dated September 14th to 16th, 2019. Buried in the background of one photo, taken on the evening of September 15th, were two figures in the distance that facial recognition software identified with 78% confidence as Sarah and Mike Chen. But they weren't at their Hidden Lake campsite. The photo's metadata placed them at Avalanche Lake, nearly 5 miles away from where they were supposed to be camping. More significantly, they appeared to be with a third person, someone not in their original camping party. The discovery prompted a complete re-examination of the Chen family's movements on their last day. Cell phone tower data, previously thought useless due to poor coverage in the park, was reanalyzed using new techniques. The results revealed that Mike's phone had briefly connected to a tower at 6:23 p.m. on September 15th, not from Hidden Lake, but from a location consistent with Avalanche Lake. This meant the family had traveled to a completely different area of the park on their final evening, despite leaving all their camping gear at Hidden Lake. Agent Reeves immediately launched a search operation at Avalanche Lake. Within hours, they found evidence that the Chen family had indeed been there. Tire tracks from their rental SUV, barely visible after 5 years, but detectable to forensic specialists. But they also found something else: a second set of tire tracks from a different vehicle, along with evidence of a hasty campsite that had been dismantled quickly. The investigation now focused on identifying the mysterious third person seen with the Chen family in the Instagram photo. The breakthrough came from traffic cameras along the single road leading into Glacier National Park. FBI technicians enhanced footage from September 15, 2019, looking for vehicles that matched the tire tracks found at Avalanche Lake. They found their answer in a white pickup truck with Montana plates, captured entering the park at 2:17 p.m. and leaving at 11:54 p.m. the same day. The truck belonged to Raymond Ray Hillman, a 42-year-old unemployed construction worker from Whitefish, Montana. Hillman had a criminal record including assault, theft, and drug-related charges. More significantly, cell phone records showed that Hillman had been in contact with someone using Mike Chen's phone number at 7:30 p.m. on September 15th, a call that lasted 23 minutes. When FBI agents arrested Hillman at his trailer home, they found evidence that completely explained the Chen family's disappearance, though the truth was more tragic than anyone had imagined. Under interrogation, Hillman confessed to a crime that had started as opportunistic robbery and escalated into something much worse. According to his statement, Hillman had been in the park that day looking for campers to rob, a scheme he'd used successfully before during busy summer months. When he spotted the Chen family's expensive camping gear and SUV, he decided they would be easy targets. Hillman approached their campsite that evening while they were preparing dinner, initially pretending to be a fellow camper in need of help. He claimed his truck had broken down and asked if they could give him a ride to get assistance. The Chen family, being good Samaritans, agreed to help. They packed baby Emma into their SUV and followed Hillman to his supposed breakdown location at Avalanche Lake. Once there, Hillman's true intentions became clear. He demanded money and valuables, threatening the family with a hunting knife when they tried to leave. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," Hillman claimed. "I just wanted their cash and gear." But when Mike tried to protect his family by fighting back, the situation escalated rapidly. In the struggle, Hillman stabbed Mike fatally. Sarah, holding baby Emma, tried to run but fell into the partially frozen lake in the darkness. According to Hillman, both Sarah and Emma drowned before he could reach them, though investigators suspected he made no real effort to save them. Panicked and realizing he'd committed triple murder, Hillman spent hours trying to cover up the crime. He weighted the bodies with rocks and sank them in the deepest part of Avalanche Lake, then attempted to clean up any evidence of the struggle. Most crucially, he drove back to Hidden Lake and tried to stage the scene to make it look like the family had simply vanished from their tent. He left their camping gear in place, kept the stove running, and zipped the tent shut from inside before exiting through a cut he made in the back wall, which he then sealed with camping tape. The staged scene had worked perfectly, fooling investigators for 5 years. Hillman claimed he had scattered some of the family's belongings in the ravine to create false leads, but investigators believed this was actually done much later, possibly after Webb's climbing activities in the area raised concerns that evidence might be discovered. With Hillman's confession in hand, FBI dive teams were dispatched to Avalanche Lake. The lake was nearly 100 feet deep in some areas and had remained partially frozen for much of the year since 2019. After 3 days of searching with specialized underwater equipment, dive teams recovered the remains of Mike and Sarah Chen from the lake bottom. Baby Emma's remains were found nearby, still wrapped in the blanket Sarah had used to keep her warm that final night. The condition of the remains confirmed Hillman's story. Mike showed evidence of knife wounds consistent with the confession. Sarah and Emma showed signs of drowning, though the cold water had preserved enough evidence to confirm the cause of death. Raymond Hillman was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Given the overwhelming evidence and his own confession, he pled guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Marcus Webb was charged with interfering with a federal investigation and tampering with evidence related to the Stroller. However, His cooperation with the investigation and the fact that his actions ultimately led to solving the case resulted in a plea agreement for 2 years probation and community service. The Chen family was finally laid to rest in Seattle, 5 years after their disappearance. Sarah's parents established a memorial fund for outdoor safety education, while Mike's family created a scholarship for computer science students. The resolution of the Chen family case brought closure to their loved ones, but it also raised troubling questions about safety in America's national parks. Park officials implemented new safety protocols, including improved communication systems and more frequent patrols of remote camping areas. They also launched an education campaign about the risks of helping strangers in isolated locations. Agent Reeves called the case one of the most complex she'd ever worked, noting how the staged crime scene had misdirected the entire investigation for years. "The hardest part wasn't the wilderness setting or the technical challenges," she said. "It was overcoming our assumptions about what happened. We were so focused on the mystery of how they disappeared from a sealed tent that we never considered the tent itself might be part of an elaborate cover-up." The case also highlighted the importance of digital evidence in modern investigations. Without the Instagram photo and enhanced traffic camera footage, Hillman might never have been identified. Marcus Webb's role remained controversial. While his actions ultimately led to solving the case, many questioned whether his decision to move evidence and delay reporting had prolonged the family's suffering. "I understand why he did what he did," said Sarah's father during a press conference. "But I wish he'd found the courage to come forward sooner. We might have had answers years ago." The stroller itself was returned to the family and buried with baby Emma, a final reunion after years of separation. Today, a small memorial plaque sits near the Hidden Lake trailhead in Glacier National Park. It bears the names of Sarah, Mike, and Emma Chen, along with a simple message: "In memory of a family who loved the mountains." The plaque doesn't tell the full story of their disappearance or the 5-year investigation that followed. Instead, it focuses on what matters most: that they were a loving family whose lives were cut short by random violence. Hikers and campers often stop at the memorial, leaving flowers or small stones in remembrance. Many don't know the details of what happened, but they understand the universal tragedy of lives lost too soon. The Chen case changed how investigators approach disappearances in wilderness areas. It demonstrated that even the most puzzling mysteries usually have logical explanations, even when the truth is more disturbing than the mystery itself. For the rescue workers who searched tirelessly for 5 years, the resolution brought mixed emotions. They were relieved to finally have answers, but haunted by the knowledge that the family had been the victims of human cruelty rather than natural disaster. "We always hope for miracle rescues," said Park Ranger Morrison. "Finding out they were murdered doesn't feel like closure. It feels like failure." But perhaps the most important lesson from the Chen family tragedy is simpler. In our eagerness to help others, we must also protect ourselves and our loved ones. Trust and caution don't have to be mutually exclusive. Sarah and Mike Chen died because they were good people trying to help someone in need. Their generosity cost them everything, but it also reminds us why kindness matters in a world that can sometimes seem cruel beyond understanding. The mountains of Glacier National Park continue to attract families seeking adventure and connection with nature. Most return home safely, carrying memories that will last a lifetime. The Chen family's story serves as both a warning and a tribute, a reminder that while the wilderness holds many dangers, the greatest threat sometimes comes not from nature, but from our fellow human beings. Their memory lives on in the love they shared, the adventures they experienced together, and the hope that their story might help protect other families in the future. The investigation may be closed, but Sarah, Mike, and Emma Chen will never be forgotten.